In a socially distanced world, Design United is an optimistic digital platform for collaborative design and connection. Design United was created in March 2020 during a period of intense lockdown and quarantine measures within the region. The aim behind Design United was to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young regional designers and design practices. A much-needed network of support and peer mentorship during these uncertain times. Talented young designers and design studios working on design innovation with an approach that is relevant to our South Asian region have been invited to be a part of the platform. We also encourage design students from the region to share their work, be involved in the dialogue, and to be an active part of Design United. Design United, most of all, believes in creating a community of designers and design knowledge that is largely contextual, with focus on contributing to the environment and our community. Design United believes greatly in a spirit of collaboration and idea exchange. Welcome to Design United's 37th Design Conversation. Our apologies for starting late today. Today, we will be in conversation with two talented designers from India and Sri Lanka. I'm Varna Shashidhar, founder principal of a regional landscape practice, VSLA, based in Bengaluru. I'm supported by Clayworks Spaces in this endeavor. Clayworks creates flexible co-work spaces that focus on productivity and sustainability. I'm also supported by a wonderful DU core team and volunteers and the VSLA team in this endeavor. Design Conversation has featured talented emerging designers from our region, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, selected for their innovative approaches and practices that bear a deep resonance to the place they are from. We've also had brilliant mentors, regional designers with great expertise and commitment to mentoring younger generation of designers. Design United also firmly believes in interdisciplinary design connections and collaborations. So please continue to join us every week on Saturdays for our conversations. With this background to Design United, let's move to the much-awaited presentation and conversation this evening. I'm delighted to welcome our presenting designers, typeface designer Pooja Saxena from India, and design and image maker Alain Parizeau. Their presentation will be followed by a moderated discussion. Pooja Saxena is a typeface designer, letterer, typographer, and design educator from New Delhi, India. Her work is focused on Indic scripts, Devanagari in particular. Pooja studied typeface design at the University of Reading and works part-time as a designer and font engineer at Type Together. Pooja documents street lettering and since 2017 has conducted type walks in Delhi and Bangalore. Welcome to Design Conversation, Pooja. Our second presenting designer is Alain Parizeau. Alain Parizeau is a founding member and image maker of Public Works alongside his partner Shamili De Silva Parizeau, who is a writer and strategist in Sri Lanka. Public Works is a multidisciplinary publisher and consultancy where visual language meets the written word. Essentially, their work is creating stories to make and manage meaning across physical and virtual spaces. They are thinkers, makers, and storytellers. Welcome to Design Conversation, Alain. We request Pooja to please begin today's design conversation with her presentation. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, Varna, and thank you, Design United, for having me here. Um, Believe me, I really understand how hard Zoom fatigue can be, and so I'm all the more grateful for all of you who've decided to spend your Saturday afternoon with us. I hope I can keep things interesting enough so that none of you fall into sort of like a late afternoon stupor. My name is Pooja Saxena, and usually I work under the moniker Matra Type. I'm trained as a communication designer and as a typeface designer who specializes in Indic scripts. But more than those two things, I'm a very restless person, especially when it comes to uh, all the different things that I want to do, and also when it comes to what to do for work. Uh, for a brief while, when I was about to go and study typeface design, I convinced myself that once I became a typeface designer, that is the only thing I would do. Looking back, it comes off as a little bit naive. One, because a career in such a niche specialty is difficult and time consuming to build, but also because I like doing a lot of things and I like having variety in my day. And I believe that that is one of the things that, helps me keep working hard day in and day out without feeling drained or bored. What you see on your screens now is all the different hats that I've worn professionally over the last few years, some more, some less. And in addition to that, I'm often a manager of both people and projects. And when required, a mentor to younger colleagues who are, themselves looking to carve their own niche. So, what does it mean really to have a practice which, involves all of these different little buckets? So, as a typeface designer, I make commissioned fonts. You can see a few of them here. The first one is a Gujarati typeface called Farsan. The second one is a typeface for a script called Old Chiki that is used to write the Santali script. The last font you see is one called Kambe, which supports the Devanagari script. Apart from working on commissions that come to me, I also work with very talented colleagues at Type Together, which is an international type foundry where we all cooperate on typeface design projects that span a number of languages and scripts. I also work as a font engineer. And in this role, I basically help make fonts in Indic scripts work. So scripts from India, such as Devanagari, for example, that is used to write Hindi and Marathi, offers a lot of challenge to font makers. It is not enough to simply draw all the letters that you need, but it also requires a little bit of programming magic to make these letters come together to form words and sentences. And that is where a font engineer comes in. Aside from making fonts, I also work as a letterer. That means that I will, for a client, often draw just a word or a phrase or a sentence in a customized style to suit their needs. This often takes the form of custom logos. And you can see these two that I've done in the last few years, one for Byju's and next the Hindi version for the news website, The Print. Uh, but also often editorial purposes need lettering. The one you see on the left is a piece of lettering I did for Vogue last year to celebrate the preamble to the Indian Constitution. The one on the right is pieces of multi-script lettering that I did for a book of translations published by the Asia Art Archive. Um, I also work as a typographer, which means that I have to carefully and thoughtfully typeset texts, and they can take the form of books or reports, as you see one here for the Ajivika Bureau done last year, and also websites. Speaking of books, I also love designing book covers, and that I suppose makes me a graphic designer, though a lot of my work as a letterer or even an illustrator tend to creep into it every now and then. Whenever I have the opportunity, I absolutely enjoy writing about design and in specific about typography. Um, for the last few years, I've also lent my support to organizations whose work I believe in so that they can communicate their message better to the world. Most recently, from the beginning of last year, I've been working with the most lovely women and queer led independent bookstore in Bangalore called Champaka to help them tell their story through social media much better. Part of my practice also involves research. This can take the form of design research, like this almost a year and a half long exercise of extensive systems mapping of digital identity systems across the world, which I did with colleagues at the Center for Internet and Society, but also very often research into design and typography and their histories. Now, this ties in very well with perhaps my favorite hat of all, which is that of a collector. I collect newspapers from across the country and around the world. I collect vintage books. I collect modernist stamps from India. And most recently, I started collecting Amar Chitra Katha comics. I believe each one of these objects and collections is a peek into design histories and printing technologies and decisions, and all of that I absolutely adore unpacking. And that brings me to the final, I think, thing that I do, which is teaching. It takes its traditional form as courses I might teach in a university, but also in more unconventional ways, in the form of online workshops or typography walks. And now you may wonder why I would take you through this sort of whirlwind tour of all the things that I do. And it was largely to illustrate two or 3 points. The first is that even though at this point my career is almost a decade long, it's only now that I'm slowly coming to accept that it is okay that there isn't only one thing that I do, or that there isn't only one thing that I want to do. This is not an accident, but a choice, and it is a reflection of the person that I am. And as long as it pays the bills, lets me save enough, all the while I'm happy, who is to complain? Except often I find that the person complaining the most is me. Um, this kind of multidisciplinary existence can come with its challenges. The greatest one I find is to be able to tell people what I do. So when someone asks me, so what do you do? What have you been up to? I never find that I can give people a simple answer. Even my own website, my professional website currently, doesn't quite capture all the work that I do because I haven't really managed to conceptualize what that might mean. Um, the one place where this becomes a huge challenge for me is actually social media. Sometimes I will see like these beautifully curated grids on Instagram feeds, or very carefully put together personas of designers, and I have to admit that makes me feel quite inadequate. Just a few months ago, I agonized for hours trying to decide whether it was better to leave like a nicely curated grid of my illustrations or share an image of a typeface design project that I was very excited about. Um, so I'm saying all of this to say that if you have been feeling overwhelmed by how to share your work, especially on social media, know that you're not alone. I have no foolproof piece of advice to give here, given as I'm struggling myself, but I've been trying to push myself more and more to stay true to myself rather than project a persona that may not be in any way a reflection of who I am. Um, this may make it sound like having a practice which involves all of these different bits and pieces is all bad, but that's not the case. I think one of the best things about it to me is the opportunity to be able to interpret the same themes and the same interests afresh. um, I use the word themes and interests instead of inspiration because inspiration tends to be a very sticky word when it comes to design. All too often, for a lot of people, all it means is to see something and copy it. Other times, people wait for it endlessly and sort of uh, turn its absence into a one size sort of fits all excuse for procrastination. Instead of inspiration, I like to think of influences and interests. I think the most reliable source of ideas in my work has been the things that I've been interested in over the years, things that I have studied and learned about slowly and steadily. Each of them has made me look at things from a different perspective and allowed me to build my own case studies to sort of understand how people solve problems. This I have found is infinitely more useful than inspiration. So, I want to share one of these interests with you and give you a little look into how it has played a part in catalyzing the work that I have done over the years. Um, The interest I want to share with all of you is my interest in things made out of pixels. Um, I grew up as a kid who spent a lot of time on MS Paint, and somewhere down the line, I became deeply interested in letters and illustrations made out of pixels. Uh, Back in high school, my younger brother, whose name is Pratik, would make these lovely pixel portraits, and I just always marveled at his talent. Uh, Being pretty bad at doing something like that myself. Um, when the Delhi Metro started its operations, this sort of interest in pixel based things grew into this extensive documentation of how letters looked on its various LED signs. Um, and as someone who was then a budding typeface designer, it became a way to look at letters more closely, even if they were simple pixel made ones, and sort of try and examine what made them work and what didn't. And from there, whenever I traveled, so this is from Bangalore, wherever I lived, this is from Reading and London. Pixel letters in public transport systems kind of became the light to my mouth. Um, Very quickly, this interest in pixel based modular things, uh, I took to tangible objects, using whatever lessons I had learned on what makes pixel letters look good. I started to make large scale public lettering installations using the same tools. This is something that I did with Kriti Monga back in 2010. It was made up of hundreds of hand folded paperboards that floated, and it was, to me then, a very, very exciting extension of my digital practice into, an analog one. Um, I kind of, deep dived into the history and technology behind early fonts for computers. But from there, I took the sort of unexpected detour into weaving patterns and embroidery patterns, especially cross stitch ones. I realized that designers of these patterns, um, even more so women who embroidered or sewed, were basically working with similar constraints as those who were designing for low resolution screens. I discovered this fantastic book by Elsie Spennis, which is called A Handbook of Lettering for Stitchers. And this is probably a decade ago, but I basically immersed myself in trying to digitize these embroidery patterns into fonts that I could use in my own graphic design projects. This interest sort of continued when I went to the University of Reading to study for my type design masters, where one of my teachers, Michael Twyman, introduced me to Maison Serjou's embroidery pattern books, which suddenly just exploded the world of, stitching and embroidery letters that I had been familiar with till then. So from pixels, I slowly started to move to all kinds of modular type systems, and this led me to stencils. And while that meant more research and reading, it also opened my eyes to exploring new ideas for typefaces that I might want to design myself, such as this work in progress design, which took traditional calligraphy and kind of reinterpreted it into a heavy stencil display design. What you see here, the word alphabets, that went on to the header of this wonderful website called alphabets.org, which is a sort of loose collective of non-male typeface designers, letterers, and completely worth checking out. Um, I also began to find, as I was drawing my own stencil typefaces, that the constraints of stencils were very good tools to introduce my students to typeface design. This is an example of a project that a student from the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology created in 2017. Working for a fortnight, the brief for the students was to create a small working stencil typeface which used the minimum number of modules for the maximum impact. In 2019, I was asked to introduce early students of fashion and textile design at Pearl Academy to typography because it was seen that the inherent patterns in typography would have some kind of visual resonance with the work of fashion designers and textile designers. For this, I facilitated a hands-on workshop making letters through paper weaving. paper weaving, hoping that, at the end of the day, all of us were left with a much greater appreciation for both handloom weaving and letter design. In yet another workshop, this time in the middle of the pandemic lockdown with students all the way in Vienna, I once again tapped into pixel lettering. I started with arcade game typography, a cultural and design phenomena global enough that I believed it would break our cultural barriers. In a couple of days, students familiarized themselves with the Devanagari script to create small lettering samples. uh, the simplicity of pixels helped them tackle a brand new script they had been completely unfamiliar with before the workshop started. Because pixels themselves were so simple, it made the exercise manageable, allowing them to, you know, explore interesting visual ideas while also understanding proportions and shapes that they didn't know before. Now, of course, this whole meandering would not be complete till I made an attempt to draw my own pixel typeface. And this is a project that has been on the back burner for years and slowly coming to a close. Um, for this kind of self-initiated project, I gave myself a brief not dissimilar from the one that I give to my students at Srishti. It was to figure out what would be the minimum height of the pixel grid within which I could make a legible and good-looking Devanagari typeface design. Of course, once grids were on my mind, all I could think about was to break them. So this is another lettering project I did for my online shop, where the idea was to still work with little modules, but no longer have the constraint of a grid. Increasingly, I've also been very drawn to modular lettering using tiles. And these are two beautiful examples, the first one from Chennai and the second one from Ahmedabad. Recently, I joined my very good friend Ambika Joshi, who goes by Computational Mama on Instagram, to explore how I might use P5JS to programmatically recreate modular tile lettering. If any of you is interested in a programmatic approach to design and art, you should definitely check her work out. To sort of bring the story to a close, finally, after years of trial and error and quiet drawing, I finally can even call myself something of a pixel illustrator. Through the lockdown, I made a small visual diary of sorts, capturing what I called my pixelated life. So then this is where I want to leave you all. I hope this look into my very khichdi of a practice and how I nurture and grow my influences will be of some use to you. Thank you once again for having me, and I look forward to your questions. See you all on the internet.
Thank you so much, Pooja, for sharing your multifaceted design journey and your fascinating work with us. Your presentation melded so well your exploration, interests, your practice, and teaching. Thanks once again. We would now like to invite Alan to please share his work and the audience to please share your questions post the presentation. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you, Pooja. That was really nice. It's really great work. The presentation that we're doing is called "Making and Managing Meaning." That pretty much summarizes what we do at Public Works, because it's not so much making up stories, but also managing and negotiating the way the story is told and understood. So I'll get started, but before we get into the kind of the flesh of the presentation, I'll just explain to you what I'm going to be talking to you guys about. I'm going to be showing you guys, walking you guys through our process, our design process, and showing you examples along the way of each of those parts. But before we get started, I think it's a little context is important by what we mean by story and storytelling. I think in all cultures, there's some kind of reference or usage of the drum or the drummer. In Sri Lankan history or culture, you have the andabera, karya, which is the person who does the drumming, if you were to translate it, sort of. And even before the colonial period, there was a guy sent out by the king, and when there was news, he would go out with his drum, and show up at the village and like taka ta taka ta tak and get everyone's attention, but also, tell the news, but in a using story. And over the last 100 years, several hundred years, nothing's really changed. We're still making noise and trying to get people's attention and telling them stories. And we love that. We love stories, and we try as much as possible to make money telling stories, essentially. So that's what we mean by storytelling, the drummer. Right, so chapter 1, and we inch closer towards the beast. So the way we start all projects, for those of you who are listening who are from Sri Lanka and have worked with us or know about us, we're known for our questionnaires. The questionnaires started off as 5 or 6 questions, and now they're in about 40 questions or so, and they're range from multiple choice to full paragraph answers. And this was mainly due to protect ourselves and the client, just to make sure that we were clear. Usually what happens for anybody listening who's worked on projects with board members or multiple owners, sometimes there's conflicts within the stakeholders, where they're not quite on the same page as to what they think their company is. And sometimes they'll have one preference, where like one partner is very extroverted and willing to take chances, while the other partner is more reserved. And particularly in terms of branding or any kind of communication for that brand, if you've had this problem, that it's quite problematic, because if the stakeholders can't agree on what the identity of the company or what the direction they want to go in is, it's very difficult to just move forward in terms of design. So we have these questionnaires, and they're pretty much based on psychological profiling. Simple questions like the one we have on screen here. How if your company was a person, how old would this person be right now? And I've got an example here of a questionnaire we did for a cultural museum that's going to be branding itself in the next year. You can see that out of all the people who answered, who are the decision makers, they really couldn't agree on the age bracket. So already you can see that if we were to move forward with an identity, a brand identity that looked young, half of the stakeholders would disagree and want it to look older. So what's great about this is it allows us to really identify and clarify things from the beginning. And then we use this questionnaire to build a framework. And the questionnaire itself pumps out a lot of insights, and a lot of it's based on Jungian sort of archetypes of personality. This is a framework for securities companies that we're working with. And you can see here that the questionnaire created a profile. So you can see the positioning in terms of personality archetypes is really the ruler, and then secondary, the sage, and then third, the everyman, and then the fourth, the hero. So if you're not familiar with Jungian archetypes, there's a group of personality types that every single person fits into. Now, it doesn't mean that you're that person for the rest of your life, but it just allows you to understand behavioral patterns. And what we do with this is it allows us to make all of our design decisions from that moment on. This is really great because it removes all biases. So it prevents us from, making the logo pink because we like the color pink. It also prevents us from using the picture of a frog because someone thought the frog was really cool. What it does is, for those of you who are familiar with visual language, you can create derivatives from each of these personalities and pick your fonts, pick your colors, and pick your your graphic styles directly from these sets of guidelines. Now, there's still some magic. There's still some, you know, there's still human elements to it, and I'll get to that in a minute. But this definitely starts the project on the right foot, and allows us, whenever there's a conflict. So let's say if Shamli and I see the brand differently, or even if the client's involved in the process for some reason, and we can't seem to resolve it, we always come back to this framework, and this allows us to create hierarchy. So we can then take all of our sketches and say, okay, which sketch has more of the ruler personality? And in terms of writing, because we do a lot of writing for companies, for anything from annual reports to social media, like content creation, for Shamli, it's very important for her to understand what is the voice of the company, of the brand. So we use this also to create word catalogs, vocabulary. Sometimes when we create identities for clients, we also give them like default replies, you know, not to disconnect them from people online, but sometimes you just need to put a response. So we'll give a set of emojis and a set of replies, quick replies that sound like their brand. So if they need to delegate that to someone in their company who doesn't necessarily understand the brand as well as they do, because we work with a lot of small businesses, so they rely on a team of people. So this is really helpful in that way. The other tool that we use are playlists, YouTube playlists. And the reason why we do this is because at any given time, we'll have 2 or 3 brands that we're working with. Although we keep our client list very small, we never have more than, I'd say, 4 clients at any given time. Because we need to be able to jump from one brand to the other and get into that personality very fast, because we're either producing content or we're solving a problem for them, a communication problem. We rely on these playlists to quickly jump into that personality. So sometimes we share these playlists publicly, sometimes they're private, but this is we did an identity for a graduate school, and I'll just play you a couple of tracks just so you get an idea and see if you can imagine now or feel what the brand identity is for this graduate school. So you can hear this is from the selection of instruments that these artists use. It's very focused. It's very sophisticated sound. There's a synthetic sound to it. This graduate school specialized in the research and of technology and the use of technology and design. It's also very optimistic. All the tracks are kind of like uplifting and taking you on this journey. So these are ways, and these playlists can range from anywhere from 30 tracks to 100 tracks. Usually the longer we've worked with the brand, the bigger the playlist, because every time we hear music, we add to it. And sometimes playlists are not necessarily music. Sometimes there's more of a visual element to it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Carol Christian Powell. This is a fashion show where they had all the models dressed in the clothing. It's called Mainstream Downstream, and they had all the models floating down the canal with the stream as a sort of message to, you know, how fashion is becoming more and more mainstream. And it's quite eerie because the models look like they're dead, but they were set up that way to float, and the people watching the fashion show, you know, were along the canal. And there was these beautiful reds and oranges peppered in the outfits. So we do this again, if let's say we get called to do, you know, to come back and do some more work on the brand, we can quickly jump into it. Because at the end of the day, we're all running businesses. Like, we're all designers, we're all artists, and we're all in it for the heart and for the passion. Let's not, that's obvious. But we also need to make money. And the longer it takes us to get into the mood as creatives, the more we lose money, because you're trying to maximize profits. So we do little things like this. We systemize our process in order to, even with the questionnaires, we also end up saving money for the client, because there's a lot less, because the clients fill out the questionnaire, there's a lot less time wasted in the research process, because right away we've got stuff that we can start using to produce content. Right. Next slide. How do I get to the next slide? What's going on here? Everything started playing. Okay. Right. The next area to the first phase of work, the research and synthesis, is human insight. So as much as we have questionnaires and we've systemized a lot of our process, there still has to be a human element to it, and that's really the magic. But the human element really has to do with the human side of our design practice, which is observing the world. We travel a lot around the country. We're constantly, looking for taboos and stories and folklore, and that weaves its way into our work. We also tend to work with clients who are culturally connected, who are interested in, and whose brand is interested in having a little bit of culture in it. And one of the things we did during lockdown as a small project for us to keep ourselves motivated, as we all did, but also because we had a lot of questions. We were wondering what the future was going to be like. So we started asking people what they thought, what it'd be like next year or in the future, and had all these interesting people that we knew give us these forecasts, these predictions, and then worked with photographers that we knew, or if there was content that we already had, we would pair up photography to go with a story that we wrote. So we would take the forecast and then invent a character in that future who was living that life. And it was also a way to promote ourselves, to show our abilities as storytellers, to create stories from real life things. So it's really important that as much as you as content creators, you create content, you have to be authentic. Like, you have to have a real story somewhere there. Otherwise, it's just bullshit. It's just nonsense. So it's very important that our work is based on something that is real, or some kind of connection to what people know. So the human element and human insight to our stories and to our research is always important. So we'll take the research from the questionnaire and pair that with research that we've done either in the target audience or in the market, and then synthesize that into a final piece. So then we get to chapter 2. She lived and died many lives that week. So this is the prototyping and testing phase. And this is where we do rapid prototyping. We do a lot of different versions, and then using the framework, we kill or refine and select the ones that are most on brand. And to do that, we usually have 4 categories of types of stories that we'll tell. And we do this with a lot of companies that we have. We tell them to think about their product or their message in 3 different types of stories. One, which is origins or backstory. The other one is products and services. And the other one is resources and people. And the last one is lifestyle and mindset. And that, you can pretty much take any campaign, any identity, any communication, corporate communication, and they will always fit within those 4 categories. So for all you content creators or people who are making money right now, posting on social media, start organizing your content into these 3 categories. And by doing so, you're going to be able to produce content a lot faster that's on brand. So origins would be like, you know, for example, this is for a hotel in the East Coast that we work a lot with, and we tell stories for them. We think about all the different things that they're trying to say, and then we think, okay, is this a backstory? Is this how the hotel started, or is this how the village where the hotel is? What's the story behind the village? And then products and services would be amenities. So we can organize. So when we have a client and they'll have, you know, 3,000 photographs saved on a Google Drive somewhere, we right away organize all their content into these three categories. The next kind of prototyping, this is the city stories we did for Urban Island. And I think in the promotional pieces that were shared on Instagram, there was a picture of a runway, one of the Urban Island runway shows 2 years ago, I think. And this is an example of what we do is sometimes we sell outright. Sometimes we'll produce images or even words, stories, and we sell them as a product to a client. And this was an example of that, where they wanted like a graphic that would be associated with the brand, but that they could use to produce merchandise. And we get a lot of hotels that want to do this too. They want something that doesn't say that doesn't have their logo, but that still represents what their company is about, that they can use for merchandise. I first started learning how to do this back when I was in university, doing, you know, merchandise for my friends' bands and stuff like that, where you needed something that promoted the album, but that wasn't necessarily just their logo. So in this case here, mock-ups, you know, and you can either purchase the mock-ups or you can use the free ones. But we use mock-ups, usually the sort of Photoshop mock-ups, to quickly test out logos and graphics and even language like words and so on, to see what happens when we use them in different situations. So even though what was sold in this case, for example, was the Colombo driver, the red and blue piece, before we gave it to them, we tried it on as many different things as possible, the whole series. So there was a gull rooster, there was a Colombo driver, there was a candy gem, and we did a whole bunch more too for other cities around the country. And what was interesting about this is that the part of the brief was also that the target audience was tourists, so people who didn't know about Sri Lankan culture or about the cities in Sri Lanka, but also for local, their local market who shopped at the store. So it you know, you couldn't just use the elephant or the peacock that everyone had seen before, but you still had to show the elephant, you know. So in terms of, you had to reference parts of the city that tourists loved, that attracted the tourists, but also didn't bore the people who lived in the city, in that specific city. So a lot of testing is done through mock-ups. Another thing that we do is we try to sit on projects. We encourage clients to at least just before we finalize the design or anything that we send it out as a final product, we always encourage people to wait 24 hours. Usually we have some clients that need us to do the work really fast, sometimes in like ridiculous periods of time. And that doesn't allow for anything to sit and for your eyes to catch mistakes. And this is an example of a book. This is a man named Joel Rapp, who walked from the southern tip of Sri Lanka to the north tip of Sri Lanka, then took a flight to southern tip of India, and then walked across India, and basically walked to the United States. He walked back home, and the trip was called The Long Walk Home. And along the way, he photographed, you know, what he saw. It's an amazing book, and he asked us to help finish it because he had worked with another designer. And we had to sort of create a system, a layout system that he could use. And he was kind enough a couple of days ago to send us this video of just flipping through it so you can see it. I'm gonna put it at double the speed so it goes a bit faster. So you can see it's a 400-page book. I mean, it's a massive, it's a brick. But this is the dummy. This is like what the printers printed for us. I mean, it's you could sell it as it is, but it's definitely, you know, we needed to see it, and instead of just going with the final, we're going to print a second version now that we've seen it and we've held the book in our hand. For those of you who do books, you'll probably feel the same way. You need to hold the book sometimes to really feel and see how the book is designed. So yeah, you know, prototyping also means letting it sit there for a day and then coming back and looking at it again. And if you still don't find any mistakes, if it still fits the framework, if it still ticks all the boxes in the brief, then you know it's ready to go out, and then you send it out and, you know, move on to the next project. Other kinds of prototyping and testing sometimes involves trying to create a certain age. Like earlier you saw in our questionnaire, we tried to identify different age groups to the brand. Is it a young brand? Is it an old brand? Is it like a legacy brand? And this is an example of how sometimes we have clients that come back, you know, 5 years, 10 years later, and they no longer feel, and rightly so, feel as though their identity matches you know, where they are now. And sometimes it's a matter of just, you know, thinning out the logo. Other times it's trying to create a slightly more mature look. In this case, we were just trying to give it a little bit of a renovation. We had to fix some issues. It had gone digital. It needed a logo that would fit in smaller cases, in smaller spaces. It needed something that would also work as an app. We had a similar situation where we couldn't figure out how to get the logo to look slightly older or more sophisticated. And the owner of the company, her son came in the room, and I hadn't seen her son in maybe 5 years, and he had gotten significantly taller and lost a lot of the baby fat. You know, he was like 16 or 17 now. So he got thinner and taller and slightly less boyish and a little bit more, looked a bit more like a man. And if you've ever seen your cousin like that, you know, after a while, they've lost that baby fat. And that's when we first realized that, you know, you can update your logo in a very similar way, you know, make it slightly older, stretch it from the top a bit, thin it out. So this was for an online store. We did something very similar. You can see here, it was quite wide, and we fixed up the type a little bit. And the last chapter is, we called it, he sprinkled some cilantro on it, on top, and put some relish, and, you know, send it out. So crafting and packaging. Tone of voice usually, you know, if we have enough time, and, you know, the research is properly done, we could easily capture a brand's voice and apply it either to a photo shoot like this or to the language in the post. But usually what's great about the way we work, we like to have a small number of clients and work with them for a long period of time. Because usually what happens is, even if you get it right in the first year, where you really nail their identity, and when you're producing content for them, it's spot on. It's just going to get better and better with time. So developing an authentic voice, or a voice that matches the brand personality, is also part of that crafting. So either you have a little bit of time to try to nail it, and you get as close as you can with it, as with the time that you have. Otherwise, every post, every time you work on a project with them, you always go back to that framework and reassess and build on it and improve the playlist, and get more and more familiar with the brand. The other area that we spend a lot of time crafting is also color. Um, Color is something that we didn't really pay too much attention to, a decade ago. It's only in the last, I'd say 5-7 years that we've really started spending a lot of time comparing trends in color with sentiment of the segment, the target demographic that we're looking at, and trying to create connections with what Pantone is predicting and what all these trend forecasters are predicting, and sort of synthesize that with what we've noticed in our community and in our research in terms of the segment. Because when you give really good colors to a client, and colors that work well together, that's the other thing too, is that we have returning clients and sometimes they have multiple brands, and we have to make sure that the new colors that we're suggesting or recommending complement the other brands, because they're going to want to put them all together in an email or something like that. So we spend a lot of time, and it's quite a lot of fun sometimes, naming these colors, because we try to name them so even the colors reflect the identity, and that gets a lot of fun. We were joking around that we had decided that we were going to call the color of 2021 cautiously optimistic, like a bright butter yellow, cautiously optimistic. Anyways, so stories in color is another way that we craft the work. For those of you who are familiar with what we do, we don't just work in terms of written and logos or images and word. We also take those image and words and apply them to spaces and experiences. And that can be anything from installations, temporary installations, to rentable experiences on Airbnb. And we've been doing a lot of that, particularly with this one space in Bamble-Petit here in Colombo. We have a small annex that we've been renting out, and trying to tell a story through that space has been a lot of fun. And we also link that to products. We love collecting antiques and collecting things that really have stories in themselves. So the space was also a nice experiment where everything was for sale basically in the apartment. So people could come and stay there and then buy things that they liked. And that was because we had a lot of tourists that were coming and they wanted to know where they could buy cool things from Sri Lanka to give as gifts to their friends back home. So we would fill it with cool things, either things that our friends were making or that we'd found in the country somewhere. And the moment you tell someone the story about where it comes from, it automatically increases the value of it. People appreciate it more. So this was a lot of fun. And we're still doing it now. We've taken a break now because there's no tourists. We've rented it out to a university student, and she's having a great time in it. The other thing that we do in terms of crafting is logo variations, or even just tone, voice variations. Like people, brands, sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're excited, sometimes they're aggressive, but they're still the same identity. They still are the same people. So as a general rule of thumb, we always give variations to the logo. It's also practical reasons, because today, in this day and age, your logo is mainly going to be living on a digital screen. And sometimes you need something for your profile picture, and sometimes you need something to go on a t-shirt or on an actual storefront sign. So this is an example of a cafe where we usually give 4, at minimum 3, but usually it's 4 to 5 versions. This is a Norwegian, there's a coffee shop here in Sri Lanka that's quite popular in the East Coast and in certain touristy areas, called Bites. And the owner is a Norwegian woman who is married to a Sri Lankan. And it sort of blends Norwegian comfiness and that sort of Scandinavian vibe of comfort and tasty things and good things with the tropics. That's why the moose is there and so on. But definitely different versions is important to us. And that's about it for the crafting. This section is called too much information, or it was just too much. Uh, uh, Public works, we have this philosophy of full transparency. So we share everything with our clients. And I'm going to share it with you guys now. And it's also something that I think designers don't share with each other enough, which is how much they charge. And I'm going to just leave the screen here and go directly into the sheet. And this is an example of a charging sheet for a visual identity. So it includes logo variations, the business card look and feel, color palette, letterheads, and so on. So for all you young designers out there who don't know how to make money with what you're doing, you can do your own thing. You can try this and hopefully build on it. So here you can see there's a bunch of columns. We have one-time, some things we charge as a one-time payment, and other things can be done monthly or every time you need a new one. For example, if you're doing content, that would be monthly or per post. But here the questionnaire, so the research and synthesis, we only charge once. So the advantage of you can encourage your clients to keep coming back to you if you have basically like a one-time payment for the research into their identity, because theoretically, once you've done that research, you already know. Now, the only way you can make that work to your advantage is if you create a framework. So you have some kind of document that you can always go back to. If you don't have time or you don't feel comfortable doing a framework, at least try to do a playlist of some sort, something that will allow you to come back into the brand. Otherwise, the time you're going to spend refamiliarizing yourself with the brand identity is going to, you're going to lose money. So you can see here, the way we set it up is we write down the number of hours that we need to do that specific task. And I'm not going to go, I'll come back to the middle part here. I'll go straight to the last column. And then you compare that to the given hours. So what happens is, let's say, it takes you, I don't know, in this case, it takes us 3 hours to review the questionnaire and to put it together into a framework. Between my wife and I, between Shami and I, since we're also homeschooling and we only have about 3 hours or 4 hours every day to do work. So even though the task takes 3 hours, in those 3 hours, I have to check emails, reply to people. I've got a lot of stuff to do. So even though the task takes me 3 hours, I probably won't get those 3 hours done in one day. It will be spread out through the course of the week. So I have a math here. I have the math here to calculate the average amount of time that I have to work, and then it automatically pops out a recommended number of days. So what I can do now is that, let's say I find that the task that I'm doing is going to take me 5 hours. It will automatically adjust the number of days that I can tell my client, okay, it's actually, now it's taking 5 hours. It's going to take 4.6 days for me to get back to you with that. So what's great about when you want to do these Excel sheets in advance, because every time you have a returning client, it'll be faster and faster for you to produce these estimates to your clients. Because don't forget, the time it takes to put this estimate together is also time that you're not getting paid. So, it adds up. You might end up spending an entire day putting together an estimate, and if you don't get the job, you don't have any money for that day. So this comes in really handy. Now there's another category here too, because sometimes you say to the client, well, I need about 4 days is the recommended number of days that I have to finish this job. And the client says, oh, that's great. I'd love to give you 4 days, but I really only have 2 days. So what you then do is you add up the number of days that you have. I'm just going to skip through here. And I normally put it at the bottom here. And I would put in the total number of hours in those 2 days. So let's say the client, I'm recommending the whole project takes 30 hours. And the client only gives me 10 hours. So I pop that in. And then in this column here, the given hours, it shows me, okay, according to this, well now, so you can see it's not realistic. According to this, it means I can spend 0 hours working on the synthesis and 1.3 hours working on the visual investigation and 2 hours prototyping and testing, rendering, crafting. So that what this does is either it gives me leverage to explain to the client, like, look, like I'm not going to have enough time to do this and you're not going to get the best quality. Or if they're insisting and they're still going to pay me the same amount of money, I know that in order to keep this project profitable for me, or at least for me not to lose money on the job, I have to spend only this number of hours on each task. So as designers, this stuff, we don't teach this stuff in school. And it's probably the most important thing, because at the end of the day, you're learning how we're teaching young designers how to do this as a career, but we have to also teach them how to make money with this. So it's really important that everyone listening, if you're not doing this, that you do something like this to manage it. Now we take it a step further, and we also show our profit margins to our clients. And the way we do this is that we have a value scale. So if there's a job, if there's a task that's really important, like if you fuck up that job, that task, if you get that task wrong, the rest of the job, the outcome can be very costly for the client. So for example, the research and synthesis is really important because every design decision is based on that. So, we don't have high profit margins, but it's at 28%. So what that does is we calculate 3 hours, and then we do our hourly rate times 3, and then we multiply that by 28%. So Public Works takes home in this part. Public Works will make 4,200 rupees worth of profit, and the total price to the client will be, for that task, will be 19,200. So we will invoice this, but that way also, for Shami and I, no matter what, even if this gives us a bit of leverage to negotiate too. We don't normally give discounts, but let's say there was a valid reasons to reduce the price, we would reduce the profit. But at the end of the day, Shami and I still take home, even though the company's not making that much money, her and I will still take home our salary, our hourly wage, so to make sure that we have money for our kid and and our bills. So for all you freelancers out there, this frame of mind doesn't always come into play, because you just think of your hourly wage, but you have to start thinking about yourselves as a business. So I would encourage everyone to register as a business, but if you don't want to do that for tax reasons or whatever complications, at least always create 2 columns in your costing, whether you share it with your client or not. One is what your company will take home. So that way, if your computer breaks, you've got money, a little bit of money saved up, because that shouldn't come out of your wage. That your wage is what is your labor. So we share this with clients just because we're not embarrassed to say that we're trying to make money, and I think particularly for our clients, because our clients usually are small businesses, the fact that they're also trying to make money, that's what we have in common, because not all of our clients understand design or writing or branding, but what they do understand is trying to survive as a business. So by showing them this, they can see where we're making our money. They can also make a decision whether or not they think we're charging too much, because they can see where the money's going. And Shami and I like to charge fairly, but we also like to show people where the money's going. So we also break down every single task in a project and assign a value. So you can see here that some tasks are worth more, like the descriptive caption is at 28%, but cleaning up the Illustrator file is at 23%. So it means that a junior designer could do this. So we're not charging the client as much as if it's something that I would be doing. Yeah. So I have a lot of Excel sheets like this. I'm also working on one for quoting book design, because book designs are really complicated to charge. And if anybody's interested in knowing more about that, just DM us. We've got some working math for book design, which is great. It works really well. The client pays for how much they want to put in. It's actually very similar to how architects charge, you know. It's a percentage of the total cost of the book, just like an architect would charge a percentage of the total production, the construction cost of the building. So that way, because what happens in a book design is that the client gets excited about doing a foil stamp, like a die cast, and gets excited about having like a metallic ink in there. But because you didn't quote for that at the beginning, you kind of feel a bit left out. On one hand, you're excited because it's going to look great in your portfolio. But on the other hand, you know that you're doing all this extra work now and you're not getting paid. So that we believe that when the client gets excited about a project and wants to invest more, we should also be able to invest more in our time and get equally excited about the project. But then that should be reflected in our pay as well. Yeah. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for listening. Yeah, have a good night.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing the wonderful work that you do with Shamali towards developing an authentic voice and a narrative that is both strong visually as well as conceptually. But we also appreciated the practical aspects that you shared that will be really helpful for younger designers and students who are thinking about setting up their own practices. Thank you very much, Alan, Pooja, and Shamali, for being a part of Design Conversation. With this, we open our session for conversation. We invite the audience to please share your questions for the presenters. And I'm also very happy to introduce our two moderators for the conversation this evening, Mrunmayee and Saram, joining us from Ahmedabad and Karachi. Mrunmayee Das is a film and literature student from Ahmedabad, India. Her interest dwells in lens-based practices, ecology, and visual cultures. She's also a printmaker. Saram Chima has pursued her bachelor's in communication design from Indus Valley School of Arts and Architecture, Karachi, Pakistan, with a minor in illustration design. She's drawn towards the storytelling approach through still and moving visualization. Welcome to Design Conversation, Mrunmayee and Saram. With this, we start the conversation segment. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pooja. Hello, Alain. Hello, fellow moderator, Mrunmayee. Thank you so much for such a great talk. We've been gushing over your work for the past week because we just couldn't get enough, and your presentations have just exploded most of our minds, I think. So I'm going to start with a question for Alain, and it's a little light and it's a little personal. I wanted to, actually, we wanted to ask you about how your experience has been working alongside your spouse, and what actually brought about this venture and how it has been beneficial towards the team building aspect of your relationship and with that, your work.
What I said was we really enjoy it. It's great. I mean, you know, we met at the university. Like when I was teaching at the university, we met there. So we were already working together. But I think, I mean, we have a kid, so it's nice, you know, like we don't have to leave the house. My wife doesn't like leaving the house. Shami doesn't like leaving the house. I don't like leaving the house unless it's to go surfing or something like that. But we love it. It's great. And if we used to spend so much time working for other people, you know, we might as well work for ourselves. And you know, if I'm going to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning, which I don't want to do, but let's say I have to do it. I'd much rather do it where, you know, where my family is. Yeah, it's good. I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much. We were actually really in awe, but also envious. Hopefully, we'll find that sort of arrangement with our relationship soon.
Well, it's not easy. I mean, I'm not trying to paint a perfect picture. I mean, like, you know, it's at the end of the day, we're all human, but it's still better. It's still better than the other.
Right. Hi. Thank you so much for your lovely presentations. My question is to Pooja. So both Saram and I have been like stalking you guys, and we've explored all your websites, and we've seen glimpses of the digital archives of your MG Road typework in Bangalore and the Nicholson Cemetery and Paharganj typeworks in Delhi. With such an on-ground initiative on extending one's knowledge to others, we want to know how it came to be realized and what your future plans for the project are, and also if studying in the UK was significant towards your focus on the Indic script.
When it comes to street lettering, like I think I'd been interested ever since I was an undergrad student. I mean, it's just such a lovely thing to look at, right? And it took me a few years to kind of gain the confidence to try and share that with people. And the typeworks that I do are often the culmination of many months of work. There's a lot of research that goes into it. Um, like you said, there is a lot of on ground work in the sense you have to visit the place quite often and figure out how you're going to build like a good narrative that, you know, kind of flows through a neighborhood. And then there is a lot more research that then informs whether that narrative is even possible. I've had situations where, you know, I've wanted to take people to a type walk to a place which is, you know, private, and therefore that becomes something you cannot do. um, so yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work, but I mean, part of the reason why I enjoy it so much is because there is just so much joy in sharing something you like with others. Like there just is. And in fact, a few months ago I gave a talk with Tanya George, who's a fellow type designer who's also in the audience today, I think, about how we put together a type walk. So if someone is interested, that would probably be the place to look at. In terms of future plans, I'm still too afraid of this virus thing that I would rather not mention to actually gather people, just in terms of safety to their health. But I'm hoping I'll be able to restart again soon. In terms of the last bit of your question, the reason I went to the University of Reading to study is because I had a great deal of interest in Indic scripts, and that was a place that you know, allowed me to learn more and specialize. So while my interest didn't start from there, it definitely helped me uh, become a person who could do that work, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for your answer. I'm going to go ahead and ask a common question to both of you. And this is, as young designers, artists, and students, we always try to explore as much as we can. And so we're able to figure out and answer the looming question of who we are. Uh, so did both of you have an aha moment of, you know, arriving at a point when you decided to identify as professionals working with a multidisciplinary approach and being able to finally call yourselves designers?
I think, well, there was two times I can think of where I had maybe an aha moment. One was when I took out a student loan to pay to go to university and study design school. It was like, this is a lot of money. I better I better make this work. But really, I think the moment where it was clear to me is when I can't remember when, but at some point I told someone I was a designer, and there was no doubt in my mind. There was no like, oh no, maybe they're gonna think I'm a phony. No, when I said I was a designer at that moment, I think I knew I was a designer. You know, when you say it and you don't doubt yourself, I think that's when you know you're a designer.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, in some ways, my entire presentation was an answer to your question, Ranmai. Uh,
Yeah.
not complex, but I mean, I think I've believed that I'm a designer for a long, long time. I think when I went to study design, I was quite confident that this was something I was interested in doing, and that is what I wanted to do. It is within that bigger sort of space of design, uh, picking and choosing what I want to do continues to be like a question I answer, I think, all the time. Every time I have a new interest, every time a project comes up, I think that keeps happening. But the fact that I'm a designer, I think I've known since I went to study design.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers. I think we can take a couple of audience questions. Tara?
Yes. So our first question, a very important one, I think, is to Pooja. This person wants you to enlighten us about the pricing strategy of type design.
I wish I had a good answer. Um, so I have to say, I haven't done a large number of commission type design projects, less than half a dozen, and they've usually been for larger corporations. So I've kind of been able to ask for the amount of money that made sense and then added some to it because, it almost feels like you're not working with a human being, right? You're working with a corporation. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's a very time-consuming job. So I think more than anything else, what I find is useful to do is to really understand how much time it'll take you to do a project and ensure that the price that you quote can actually pay your bills for that long. And I think that perhaps is the most important thing. And that changes as you grow as a designer as well. And then it starts to become a question of how much of an expert are you? And therefore, because you have greater expertise, you should be paid more to do something because you bring added value. So
Yes.
normally it is a combination of those two things that helps me quote a price. The third being, who is it for? So if it's a large corporation, I may be charging them X, but if I'm doing that for a small business, I understand that is not possible. That kind of goes on a case-to-case basis as well.
Right. Our next question is also for Pooja. This is from Maha. She's actually a fellow schoolmate. Her question is, that when you design a typeface, do you have any specific preference that you start from, like the upper cases or lower cases?
Mostly I'm designing typefaces in English scripts, so the uppercase or lowercase doesn't really matter.
Okay.
The idea always is to start with a small group of letters which visually represent as much of the entire alphabet as possible. So that, I mean, to take the example of, say, the Latin script, which is used to write English. So if I have drawn, let's say, a lowercase b, that might give me hints as to how I will draw the lowercase d, p, and q. If I draw one, then I have to work to draw other letters that look like that. So for any script that I would work with, there is usually a smaller group of letters that I'm looking at, which represents most of what the script looks like. And then always to kind of think of which letters show up often in words in a particular language, because those tend to have a huge impact on how a typeface looks in text. Right? So then to look at those and see how you might add a remove character for them so that the typeface is what you would like.
Okay. This is a common question for both our speakers. So which role within the design sphere do you enjoy most, since you guys wear a lot of hats, as Pooja said?
I was thinking I maybe touched upon it a little bit. I think I really enjoy collecting and research, even though that might make up the smallest part of what I do. But I think I really enjoy that most.
I don't know if I have a particular favorite role, to be honest. That's why I was hoping maybe I'd get an idea from Pooja, but I don't think there's one. Maybe finishing. The role of packaging it, sending it out. You know, when you're like, this is done. That's the best part. You know, here's the invoice. Here it is. It's awesome. It solves the problem. You know, done.
Yeah, I mean, invoice might be the best part of any project, right?
Yeah. I'd have to agree with Alain. So all the rest of the questions, thank you so much for typing them in. We will take them on our online platform due to time constraints. Thank you so much, both of us, and also for Design United for having me as the moderator. It was such an honor to be here around you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alan, Pooja, for your wonderful presentation. Also, Sharmili, and conversation today. Thanks to our moderators, Mrunmai and Taram, for their thought-provoking moderation. I know we received a lot of questions. They'll definitely be answering all the questions via Instagram. Thanks to the audience for participating, DU Clayworks team. Have a good evening and see you next week.